Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. Today we'll be painting these 7 easy Christmas botanicals in watercolor pencil. We're going to start with sketching and coloring all these individual elements first, then we're going to go over them all with water to blend them. I've included timestamps so that you can skip ahead to the botanicals of your choice. Let's go ahead and get started. So for supplies today, I'm going to be using my watercolor pencils. I have a combination of Cedar as well as Faber-Castell, but you can use whatever watercolor pencils you have on hand. And then here I have a mixed media sketchbook, so it allows me to work with water, which is really nice. And you can find a link for this one in the description below, but you can also do this, and I actually really like this idea, and that is to cut up small pieces of watercolor paper, such as Canson XL. You can use higher quality if you want. These are inexpensive, gives you lots of freedom to just play around and explore. And then what you can do with these is turn them into Christmas cards. I'm going to show you a quick example of that. These are some cards that I have done in the past using small watercolor paintings, and you can see I've added stamps, other paper. If you'd ever like to see how I assemble cards using small paintings, let me know. I could do a whole video on just assembling cards, but for today, we're just going to focus on doing these small little paintings. And the other thing I've even done is if I have a really, really small piece, I will even make it like a gift tag and just do a small painting on there, and it's just perfect for that. So keep that in mind. You can do what you want with these little paintings when you're done. But why don't we start the sketchbook and then we'll move on to those small pieces of paper. I am going to keep a regular drawing pencil handy as well, just so that if I feel like I need something that's a little bit more erasable, I have it. So just keep that in mind. You might want to have a regular drawing pencil. Why don't we start out with some easy pine? So what I'm going to go ahead and do is grab my brown and just go ahead and draw a center branch for this. So I'm just going to come down. You can see it's a little bit wiggly. And then maybe put a branch here, maybe one more over here. I don't know, something like that. You could have them a little better spaced if you want, like these two from further apart where they start, but I don't think this is going to be too bad. Then I'm going to just come in and darken it just a smidgen, a few places, and then let's add some pine needles. So to do that, super easy. We're just going to start out by kind of flicking, like starting from the center branch with our green pencil. And we're just going to kind of go flick, 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 and kind of move away from it. So I'm just going to do it like random. We don't want them to be perfectly parallel with each other. We want them more or less going in the same direction, but you don't want them to be perfectly going in the same direction. They can go a little bit more sideways, a little bit more towards the tip of the branch as you come over here. And you can just kind of add them almost randomly. Maybe a little bit there. And then just go on to the next branch, do the same thing. Okay, I'm getting a little too lined up there. Like I say, get them going in different directions, and if you catch yourself being a little too same all the time, just change things up a little bit and you should be fine. Again, I'm just flicking heavier pressure when I'm closer to the center of the branch, and then just moving out. If you want to do these little pine needles, just practice flicking on a separate piece of paper. You absolutely could. And just kind of do some flicks until you feel comfortable with it. As you can see, I got things a little bit curvy there, but overall, I think I'm happy with that. Do we want to add a few more little there? Maybe like that. Okay, let's throw another green on just to make it a little more Christmassy. The green I chose was very neutral, which is the color I like, but Christmas, hey, why don't we throw a little bit of this, I don't know, it's a little bit more of a Christmassy green, just to kind of get a little more festive stuff going on here. You know what I might even do is grab a brown and throw, this is a little bit of a, this is kind of a burnt sienna color. I'm going to throw a few brownish branches in here because I do like a little bit of brown mixed in my green, even though I want it to be festive. So I'm going to throw a bit of this brown in it as well. So I have a couple browns on the go. One's a little bit more on the orangey side, one's a little more red. But if you just have a middle brown that's not too red or too orange, that's good too. Next, let's do some red berries. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some of these circles. Now, I don't have a perfect Christmas red in the brands that I'm using today, so I actually, you know what I might do? I have this really old red pencil. It's a watercolor pencil from Crayola. I've had it since I was a child, really. You can tell I obviously haven't used it enough, but I think I might use it just because it's a good color of red. You know what? No. I'm going to use the reds I have in these other brands in case you're in a situation like me and you don't have a perfect Christmas red. I'm going to show you what you can do if you don't, but I'll use this when we get to our poinsettia. So I'm going to go ahead and use this kind of, it's actually a little bit more of an orangey red, which yes, like I know it's not the best red for Christmas, but I'm going to use it and draw these berries. And I'm kind of doing them in a cluster, if you will. I want them to kind of be grouped together here. Might do some overlapping here right away here. Let's do this. I don't know, I'm kind of inventing this, so hopefully it will turn out okay. And then what I'm going to do is just fill the berries in, but leave a highlight kind of more to the upper right of each of the berries, because I'm going to say the light is coming from the right side, which it doesn't have to come from the right side, but I just kind of, that's my default way of shading, is making my shadow on the left, highlight on the right, but you can do whatever you prefer. You know, I'm not going to put much of a highlight on that little one behind there. You can see I'm being pretty scribbly, not too careful here, just kind of basically getting these filled in with this red. Like I say, if you want to use a brighter Christmas red, go for it. I'm going to show you how to blend if you don't have a bright red. So then I'm going to come in here after, and if you have like a burgundy color, use that for your shadows. This one's almost too purple here. But if you have a burgundy color, that would be good for the shadow. Even if you have a bright Christmas red, use a burgundy for your shadow. That would be perfect with the bright Christmas red. Or if you prefer, there's no reason you can't do these berries like a dull red too. I do tend to have a thing for dull colors. So if that's you, go for that. Now I'm coming in with a little bit of this pinky color just to kind of get that to fill in a bit, because I feel like that was a little too purple. Now that was more steps than you needed to do. Like I say, if you have a bright red, just use the red, and then a deeper red for your shadow color. But I'm adding this extra layer just because maybe some of you need to do a little bit of color mixing too. You'll be able to watch me, and then when I do, as I said, some other reds later, I'll grab my my Crayola pencil. All right, now for some stems. Let's just go ahead and attach these. Something like that. We want to make these attach at the base, we could, or we can make them just two separate little stems here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and draw some little leaves in here. And as you've seen me do leaves before, I don't like to do them perfectly smooth on the edges. I kind of like to add a little bit of a bump as I draw them. So I draw my center little vein and then just kind of draw these little leaf parts around it. You can see I'm trying to overlap a little bit. I don't know, these are looking a little bit goofy. I've got them kind of crammed in here. Maybe I'll just put one leaf up here too. I don't know. I'm not too crazy about the way I drew my leaves in here, but I think they'll be okay. I might make this one just, like I say, maybe make it a little bit larger, make it come down a bit lower, closer to the stem, just so that it's not too squished into that one. Then I'm just going to quickly go ahead and color these in with the green. I'm using kind of medium pressure as I color here because I don't want to get these too dark too soon. If you want to add a few veins or deepen the veins that you have here, you could do that. Optional, but adds a little bit more of a touch. All right, are we up for a little bit of a challenge? Do you think we can do a pine cone? A pine cone's not terribly hard, but it's a little bit more challenging than the things we've done so far. So I'm going to start out by using my drawing pencil to draw this sort of oval shape. It's a little narrower. It almost looks like an egg, if you will, just to give myself some guidelines for where I put my pine cone. And then I might decide to put a few branches here. So let's just do maybe like the pine cone's coming off. The main branch is here. So we're kind of going reverse of what we did up here. And we'll just make a few branches where we can put some pine, make it a little bit festive. So is that going to work okay? Like so. We put one here. I might just drop this one down a bit. Yeah, I think I'm going to like that better. Get rid of this one. Okay, so it just gives us a bit of guidelines to make sure we're kind of liking our composition a little bit before we jump in here with our watercolor pencils. The beauty of watercolor pencils is you kind of can erase them a bit, but if you have too much, if you go too heavy with them, right, you can't. So that's why I want to just have a little bit of guidance for myself with my regular drawing pencil. All right, I'm just coming in with a quick word about this pine cone. As I was working on it, I realized I really made a lot more little pieces and details to this than I probably needed. It made it just a little bit more complex, and I want to make this as accessible as possible for everybody. So I'm going to still show you this one, but first I want to do a quick, more simplified pine cone on this piece of paper so that you can see how I would go about doing it, and then I'll just go through this really quickly because it's the same idea, but just more little shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and draw kind of this egg shape as my guideline. Then I'm going to take my dark brown pencil and come in here. Let's just turn it upright as we do this and go. You can always turn whatever page you're working on. I'm going to come in here with a little scallop, and then I'm going to come up here and kind of just almost make it like they're kind of alternating, if you will. So just coming up, and I'm kind of trying to stay within the area of this circle that I made myself, or oval shape. I'm going to do a couple at the top that are a little bit flatter, and then as I come down here, I can probably add slightly larger, probably get 3 in one row here. Slapping a little bit. Then as I come to the bottom, I'm going to make a couple small ones. And I'll just kind of tweak my shapes just a little bit. I don't know, kind of get them a little bit more, I don't know, fitting in this shape, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to erase the extra guideline that I gave myself. And then what I'm going to do is fill it in with the, well, I won't fill it in quite. I'm going to be coming in here with my brown. I'm going to make some of these poke out just a little bit more maybe. Then I'm going to come in and put a little bit of brown at the top of each of these little pieces or shapes. So I'm going to put it kind of all along in here. And yeah, I'm kind of going almost like stroking down words with each of these little pine cone pieces. So just come in here. You can kind of create that outline if you want for yourself, but then you're going to make it disappear because you're coming right up to it with your brown. Then finally, you're going to grab your burnt sienna and fill the whole thing in. And once I've got the whole thing filled in, I'm going to come in with just a little slight bit heavier pressure to kind of put it on top of each of these where I've got the darker brown already. So I'm just going to kind of go on top of my dark brown with just a little bit of the burnt sienna so that when I blend it, I've got both colors there, and they'll kind of blend nicely, I think, together. So I'm just putting a little bit of this. You don't need a ton of it, but just enhance that brown a little bit. And you're going to see me take a similar approach with this upcoming pine cone. And you can decide which one's easier. I actually found this one a little bit of a challenge as well, even with the bigger pieces. So give yourself grace, maybe practice a few times if you want, or just do a lot of little pieces. Just know it'll take, you know, a little bit just to build all those little scallops up. But practice, see if you find it easier to do the larger shapes or the smaller shapes to kind of fill your pine cone. And let me know in the comments if this simplified version was helpful for you, or if it was actually easier to just go ahead and follow me with the more complex pine cone. Or it really wasn't more complex, it just had more little pieces. So you can see what I'm doing, and I'm just going to go something like this. And then at the side, these scallops are going to be a little bit sideways, okay? So then I'm going to do just random scallops after that. I don't want them to be perfectly lined up. I'm not going to want them to look like a gingerbread roof, if I can help it. And as I'm coming to the sides, I want these ones to be a little bit flatter. Let's throw one in here. And then as I come down, I'm going to make these ones a little bit more, I don't know, upright. Let's do all the center ones first. Like I say, this one's a tiny bit more challenging, but I think you can do it. It's not too bad. So now as I'm doing the sides, I'm kind of just almost making them a little bit, let me just show you what I'm doing. So in the center, our shapes were more like this, right? So they were more like a U shape. At the side, they're kind of doing a little bit of this or a little bit of this, kind of like that, right? This side, they're going to be curved that way. This side, they're going to be curved that way. They're going to be a bit flatter. So just keep that in mind as I come down the sides here. Now to color the pine cone, I would go ahead and do the same thing that we did on our simple pine cone. You can see that initially I started with burnt sienna or our lighter brown, but I realized it was probably easier to just go with that dark brown first and then the lighter brown. You can see either approach does work, so you can start with the one that you prefer. And I'll just speed the video up because it is pretty repetitive at this point. All right, then I will go ahead, quickly draw in some of these branches. And I'm going to do some of the same thing with the pine needles, except this time I am going to make them longer. You've probably seen some pine with these nice long needles, so that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to kind of work behind the pine cone. I'm not going to put them on top of the pine cone, but I'm just going to make some nice long pine needles. So almost the same concept we were doing, but they're going to come a little bit more out to the side and they're just going to be that bit longer. And again, I'm just kind of being a little bit loose and sloppy because I want some of these to be a little bit more parallel with the branch and then some of them to stick out more. And just move your paper however you have to be able to get it to be the most comfortable for you to do these little flicks. All right, that one was definitely the most challenging one. Let's go ahead and do something a little bit more simple. Let's do something kind of like mistletoe leaves. So I'm going to draw a few lines here for branches or stems. Then I'm going to come in and just do some of these teardrop leaves. We could throw a few berries on here if we want to. Should we do that? I'm just going to use this brownish color and lightly draw a few berries in here because I want them to be kind of a white color. And then I'm going to use a little bit of my indigo blue to create a bit of a shadow. And we're just going to let these few berries just be really soft and light. I feel like I need one small one over here. Just kind of funny because of the way I got my stem there. Okay, let's just do this. And then I'll just do a slight bit of shadow with this brown color, and then I'm going to use a little bit of my indigo blue afterwards to kind of just create a little bit of a prettier shadow color. So just put a tiny, tiny bit. This indigo blue is super dark. It almost looks black, probably in the camera, but it is a little bit blue, and that's going to give us a little bit of variety when we go to wet it. But that's what we're doing with those. And then I'm just going to go back in with my green and just very softly fill these in. I'll just use a tiny bit of that brown, maybe on the shadow side of these leaves. We could easily add the brown in, and maybe we will. We can always add a little more color when we go to do our wetting later on. So I'll just put a little bit of brown here just so we get a little bit of variety, just so it's not too boring. And just put a little bit of brown on our branches or our little stems. Maybe I'll just deepen the center vein a little bit. Okay, let's call that good. All right, let's do a really simple poinsettia. So for the center of the poinsettia, I'm going to do some little yellow circles, or this is actually golden ochre, so it's kind of a golden yellow color. And I'm just doing these little scribbly circles to create the center of our poinsettia. Now we could grab our watercolor pencil and just start drawing our petals or whatever the red leaves are right away. But I think in this case, I'm going to grab my pencil just so I have freedom to erase. I'm going to draw a few guidelines for myself first, then turn each of these into my center petals, or you could call them modified leaves. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to add some more, going around, kind of filling in the gaps, and I'm going to create each of those as a slightly larger leaf. And the back ones are going to be a little shorter because they're kind of turning away from us. And then I'll just add a few more, and I'm going to call that good. This is just going to be a small and simple poinsettia. Yeah, that one's a little bit goofy. I can always change it. That's why I'm using a pencil. One here maybe. I actually don't mind that one too much. I might just let it be. That's okay. It's a small little poinsettia. Let's just go ahead and grab our red and fill it in, and then we can call that good. So I'm just going to go over this and just trace everything with my red. You definitely could have drawn this in just with your watercolor pencil. Like I say, sometimes I do that. It's just if I'm doing something that I'm a little bit hesitant on, or if I'm afraid I'll make a little bit of a mess, then sometimes it is great to grab a pencil and just make sure you're happy with your shape first. And yes, this is my Crayola watercolor pencil that I am using this time. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill these in, and I'm going to be darkening them after with some more layers. So I'm just going to fill this in solid first. Now, as you can see, all those petals are almost fused together. So to separate them, we're going to go to the petals that are in the furthest back, and we're going to darken where the edges are meeting, almost like what we did with our pinecone, but we're just deepening with the same red, and we can even grab a darker color if we want to. If you have a maroon or a burgundy, you can use that. I'll probably throw a little bit of a darker color on top after, but I'm just separating each of these out by pushing whatever's the furthest back petals visually back by darkening where they're meeting the ones in front of them. So not the whole petal, just closer to where they're meeting. And I'm pushing heavier where they meet, and then just kind of lightening off. Then I'm going over the veins, and I'm going to add some smaller side veins, almost the same way I would if I was drawing a leaf. Just doing it to the top ones for now. Then I'm going to grab a darker color, so this kind of reddish purple color, and I'm going to do the veins on the further back ones with it. And I might even add a little bit of a shadow using this color in my darker sections as well. So again, just pushing things back by putting a little bit of this kind of purpley red color. If you have a burgundy, that would be great for this. Get some more veins going here. I kind of got carried away with my shading and I ended up skipping my veins, didn't I? Okay, let's put a little bit of that dark color on these veins. I'm going to add a touch of green into the center as well. Not too much, just a little bit. And I'll deepen my yellow so it's a little bit darker. And I'm thinking I might even put a little bit of my burnt sienna kind of just to this side so we kind of get that almost shadow effect, if you will, on one section of these little dots. On one section of these little centerpieces. I think those, I don't know, I'm not a scientist or a botanist, but I think that actually is considered the flower, those little parts. But anyways, I'm just pretending that these are the petals because that's how they look. I'm just going to erase any extra pencil lines that are outside of my red. And then I'll just add a few leaves with my green. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw them pretty much the same way that we drew our poinsettia petals. Fill that in with our same Christmas green, and then I'm just going to come and fill in this area that's closest to the poinsettia so we kind of get a little bit of a shadow effect. We can always decide later if we want to add some green as well that's a deeper green. I'm going to just expand that leaf a little bit. Okay. Let's try a cedar sprig this time. I'm just going to go ahead and draw my main stem and then make some of them coming off of it. And I'm going to draw a few little berries in before I do any more stems. I'm just going to put these on here with this indigo blue. So I'm pushing very lightly because the indigo blue is very deep, dark, and intense. So I'm just going to push lightly because I want these berries to have a slight blue undertone, but I want them to be fairly light in color as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a few down here. Maybe together. I don't know. I want them somewhat grouped. I don't like them to be too scattered, but kind of tight on space. Okay. And then I'll just join them to the main stem. And then after that, we just have all these little tiny branches. So to do the branches, I'm going to, on each of these main stems, do like a few little stems that come off like this. And then I'm going to kind of fill that in with the tiny little bits of foliage that make cedar kind of have that extra bulk to it. So add a few more stems. It's almost like doing the pine, but you're going to see it's going to look different than the pine when it's done. I think we need to branch something off. I don't know, maybe here? Okay, let's add some bulk now. So I'm just going to do it almost like tiny little scribbles or curls. Just kind of fill these in so these little things are kind of coming off of it, almost like they're almost like individual little branches or pine needles. I don't even know how to describe it. Cedar are just interesting for me anyways. Well, and actually with cedar, there's quite a variety. Like God has put so much variety, even in like one kind of tree, right? And I was looking at pictures before this and I'm like, whoa, I didn't realize how many variety of like cedar, juniper, whatever there is. So I'm just gonna do my best here and I'll speed the camera up because these little branches are just kind of redundant, and I'll just go ahead and fill it in. I'm not sure if I 100% like that. This over here is looking a little awkward to me, but I'm not sure if I take the risk of throwing in any more branches or not. It's a little bit, maybe I can just extend these a little bit. Maybe just go a little bit more this way on this one. I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's a bit better. I'm not sure. Feels a bit dense here, but I'm just gonna let that be because I don't want to overwork it. All right, now for our holly. So I'm just gonna come in once again and do my red berries. I'm using my bright Christmassy kind of red, so that'll make it a little more simple as far as color mixing. And just gonna fill it in the way we did before. I'm putting red everywhere but the highlight, and then you can use whatever deep red or burgundy color that you have on hand for the shadows. And then I'm going to draw my holly in. So I'm going to have like a main branch where everything's coming off of, and maybe make it come something like this. And then I'll put a branch on either side. And that's actually, they're not really branches. These are kind of more like the center veins of our future holly here. So I'm going to kind of come in and draw my veins kind of like this, swooping down from the center of this like stem or the center of the vein. And then or the center vein rather, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to do that here as well. You could definitely draw this out if you wanted to with a pencil. Make sure you're happy with it. I've had some practice already, but I will admit, doing holly's tricky. I might even grab a pencil to do, whoops, to do the outlines of these, because just make sure I'm happy with them before I actually get them as set in stone. So I'm just kind of connecting them with almost like a swooping kind of curve motion like that. So that's kind of what I'm doing to connect my veins. And then I connected at the center together, like bring them together. So I'll just do a little swoop, and down to the center vein. And do the same sort of thing here. This one could have maybe had another vein there, but that's okay. I'm just gonna go like that. And I might even bring it in and add kind of an extra little, almost like there's another vein or something there, just the way I brought that. Did an extra swoop on both of those. Just felt like it was a bit of a jump right there. Okay, let's do the same thing here. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to lighten that up a little bit with my eraser, just so that the pencil doesn't show as much. And if you were confident enough to do that with watercolor pencil, you definitely could have, but I think I'm happier that I went ahead and did it first with my pencil. I don't know why I find holly to be a challenge. Does anybody else find that? I once saw someone who was not an artist drawing holly, and they were doing pretty well with it, and I was shocked because they were not the type of person who usually drew or did art, and yet they had an easy time with their holly. And I thought, okay, maybe holly is for the mathematicians. I don't know, because there was another artist also with me watching this other person who wasn't an artist, and we were both shocked. We were like, wow, we both think holly's hard, but so maybe some of you that think that you're not artists are having an easy go of this. So I'm just going to lightly fill the holly leaves in with this bright Christmassy green. You know what? I'm going to go deeper with my veins because they have disappeared. I might even do a little bit of a risky thing and do a lighter green for that, because it seems like sometimes the veins on holly are actually lighter, the lighter part of them. So I'm just going to go ahead. You don't have to do it this way, but I'm just going to grab my lighter green for the veins in the center, and then I'll fill the rest in with my deeper Christmassy green. And then finally, I'm going to use my darkest green and do the edges. So I'm just going to come in here and kind of deepen the edge, and then just kind of fade that out into the center of the holly. So just go deep and dark and fade it out. And I'll just speed the video up as I do this. All right, now we finally get to add our water. Now I have with me my Simply Simon's brushes. I've got a 6 and an 8 round. I've got my water at hand, and I also have a water brush pen that basically is just like a little paintbrush, but you can fill the base of it with water and you don't have to dip into your water. So I might use that sometimes just to show you guys how that works. And then finally, I have my paper towel. And I always like to keep this on hand as I work with watercolor pencil because it allows me to just wipe my brush often so that I don't get too wet and saturated. But I'll show you what I mean as I go. I'm going to go ahead and start with my number 6 brush, and I'm just wiping off excess water. And I'm going to come in here and just kind of basically go on top of my little pine needles and just like swing my brush this way and try and have the pressure lighten off as I come away from this branch, because once again, we want the pine needles to get finer as they come away from the center branch. So I'm just basically going in the same motion that I was using when I drew them and just kind of going everywhere. And I do like how I'm getting a little bit of color variation because I used multiple colors in this particular branch. If you didn't, no worries, it's still going to be pretty. And this is where you can even take artistic license and drag that paint out in some places if you want to, and create just pine needles out of your water or your watercolor paint that's basically now on your brush. So that's an option for you as well. I might go ahead and wet my center stem or branch a little bit. This is, whoa, looking very red. That's just because the brown that I used was a very reddish brown. Okay, I'm almost a little too wet there, but that's okay. It's got a little bit of a watercolor look. I just prefer to not drown things too much when I'm working in watercolor pencil. So I'll dry my brush. I'm going to let that actually get a little bit watercolory looking. I'm going to drop a little extra water in there and let that just be kind of flowing where those two branches are meeting each other. You can see when I have excess water here, I can choose to drag that color around a little bit. And if you feel like things are like mushing around too much, just dry your brush more. The drier your brush, the less things are going to blend and mush around, and the fewer times you touch it as well. Like if you keep blending and keep working over the same spot again and again, that's where it's going to start to look overworked. And you could say some of that maybe is a little bit, but I actually kind of like the way I've got things flowing there. So I'm just going to leave that be now. And I'm going to work on these berries over here. So I'm going to do the berries first, and then I'll do the leaves second. So I'm going to start in the lightest section. I generally do start my watercolor pencil in the lightest areas and then work into the darks, just so that I don't lose my lights. However, with pine, I tend to work a little bit more just going over that area. I just tend to work basically the way I've drawn it on there, because I want the finer tip at the end of my needles. Anyways, so yes, I went into my light section first, then I'm coming into my darks, and I'm going to let it be and let it just kind of blend how it wants to. And I'll come into my lights. Again, I'm going to skip around so that I don't smush all of the berries together with the way that I'm blending things. And this is the opportunity you have to make your little highlights smaller if you prefer that. Like I said, it's better to err on the side of having highlights that are a bit larger rather than the other way around. But if you ever find they're a bit large, this is a good time to just make them a bit smaller. Otherwise, I'm just going to work from light to dark. And I'll generally wash my brush between each berry so that things don't get looking flat, or that I don't drag my darkest colors into my light sections. All right, then I'm going to come in and do my green. If you are okay with your green color mingling a bit with your red, you can just go ahead and wet that green that's touching your berries. If you prefer to not have the green kind of bleed in, I'll show you what I mean. I'll let that green bleed in. You can see it's bleeding a slight bit. It's not too bad. In general, if you don't want any bleeding between the colors, just let that shape, like say, let the berries fully dry before you touch the water to your leaves. But I'm okay with a bit of blending between the two, so I'm going to just carry on. And I might even go ahead and throw a tiny little bit of this indigo blue in a few spots, maybe on my little leaves, just for some variation. I might do that in a few of them, and then I might add some red on some of them because I think that's kind of fun, but it's optional. You can just go ahead and wet your shapes and let them be. But if you want to add some red, you can, or some blue. I'm going to throw a little bit of blue into mine, just so that it makes it a little bit deeper and richer. And I'm just dragging the paint right off my watercolor pencil, and I'm just dropping it on. So I'm almost using that like it's a palette, but I'm just touching a little bit of water on my brush and just dragging it and then dropping it into the shape. So you get a little bit of a watercolor look that way. So over here on these ones that are touching the berries, I'm actually going to purposely throw some of my red in here, and I'm just going to throw some bright red that I have right here. This is my kind of Christmassy red, and I'm just going to take some of that right off the pencil, and I'm going to drop it in here. It actually is bleeding already from the berries, so that's pretty. But I do like that look. It just harmonizes it. It's kind of fun to put a little bit of red into your leaves. But adding that extra color is totally optional. If you find that to be challenging or you don't even like the look of it, leave it alone. Okay, I generally would say wet your shape before you start throwing the color in. Right there, I started throwing color in too soon. Looks ugly. Wet your shape first and then just drop the amount of red you want just where you want it. On this one, I'm going to put red at the top of the leaf, and then I'm going to put a little bit of blue at the base. And that just adds a little extra touch. Do you enjoy working in watercolor pencil? If so, I think you'll be interested in my free 2-part pencil technique mini workshop. Whether you're looking for ways to add texture to your work, or if you simply enjoy coloring and would like to add dimension to your coloring pages, this workshop is for you. You can even apply many of these techniques to graphite pencil or other dry media. I'll share examples of how I apply these techniques to inspire you with ideas for your own artwork. You can sign up for this workshop at the link in the description below. Now back to today's video. All right, so to wet this little pine cone, let's wet this one first, just so that I can show you what I'm doing. I'm going to come into the light areas and then fill in the darks. And I'm going to be jumping around so that, well, let's see. We just don't want to go too close with the shapes touching. Let's see if we can do side by side with this one. I'm probably going to end up kind of jumping around a bit so that I don't end up having the shapes blend, because if I get everything too wet, they'll bleed together. If you leave a little white space, which is kind of what I did there, or I should say a little dry space, it's very, very small, but it can keep things from blending. Or if your paintbrush is not too wet, you're going to be okay as well. If you're really wet, that's where you can kind of run into some of these things being a little bit, more likely to blend into each other, and you'll lose all these little shapes that we worked so hard to create. When I'm working on my pine cone with the mini little pieces, I'm definitely going to be letting things dry before I do every single shape, just because I don't want to lose all those little scallops. This one, because I'm leaving a little white gap, I think I'm getting away with it. You can decide what you want to do. You can always come in and kind of tweak the white or dry little gaps after. So you can definitely see where I'm leaving things dry. As I fill that in, you can kind of see those little tiny white or dry gaps between there. And like I say, when it's fully dry, I could come in and fill them up. Or what I do is I just kind of stagger how I wet things, let it dry, and then come back in and fill the gaps. But this is, I don't know, I feel like I'm not minding just leaving those little white spaces. It's allowing me to wet this a little bit faster. But you'll see me taking a more staggered approach when I do the pine cone with all the tiny little shapes. We're going to go ahead and work on each shape. I'm going to go into one, and then I'm going to skip around with this so they don't blend together. So I'm going to just go ahead and wet one of the shapes. So starting in the lightest area, work into my darks and kind of let them blend, and then jump to a different shape that's not touching it. And then keep going around doing that. Wetting a shape at the lightest section first and going into the darkest area, and I'll come back and touch those other ones after. So I'll speed this up because I think it's kind of self-explanatory what I'm doing. And I'm going to let things dry for a minute, and I'll come in and work on some of the pine branches a little bit, and then I'll come back to this because I can see it's quite wet. And if I wet the whole thing, it will just blend together. So I'm going to let those kind of sit, and let's go into here. I might even let that brown stay on my brush, and I'll use that brown and just kind of create a little bit of that harmony, if you will, letting that burnt sienna color come into my pine branches a little bit. You can see I dragged a little bit of water right out of the pine and kind of into the background a bit, and that gives it more of a watercolor look. Otherwise, I'm using really light pressure. I'm wetting things just slightly and just kind of almost going right over those pine needles with the same motion that I used when I was drawing them, but I'm trying not to be too heavy-handed here with the brush. And I actually kind of like the fact I've just got the green and the burnt sienna working together here. I think it's kind of pretty. I might even grab a little bit of that burnt sienna and just drop a little bit of it into my greens here. That's totally optional, but it can kind of create a pretty effect to have that little touch of brown in there. The odd time you catch me using a bit of a rocking motion or coming back and forth with my brush, you could do that. Just be really careful you don't end up with like really blunted edges or ends of your pine needles, because that's what can happen. All right, so back into our pine cone, and I'm going to fill in the spaces that remain, or I should say wet, and blend the places that are still remaining. I'm trying to work a little bit drier this time, and I'm also trying to leave a little bit of space if I am working with one shape that's right beside another, because I want to be able to just get this thing kind of filled in, and I think having the odd little gap of dry is going to be okay. So the berries, these are these fun berries that we did. So I'm just going to go ahead and add clean water to the lightest part of them and then work my way into the shadow and leave it alone. Wet it in the lightest part, work into the shadow, leave it alone. You can kind of see how those are just slightly, they give the impression of being a white berry, right? Just that slight bit of shadow. I am working quite wet here. You can see I keep cleaning my brush off between most of the berries so I don't have things mushing together or losing my whites. Then I'll just come in and do my little branches and my leaves. Now this is a very minty green, and if you like that, let it be. You can see that little bit of brown though, I think adds something really beautiful. I do like the fact I threw some brown into these. That's me though. And if you find they're too minty green, you can absolutely grab another more neutral green, something like this, but do it at your own risk, of course. Decide if you like it. You might want to test it on a piece of paper, but you can see here I'm throwing a bit of that more neutral green, and it takes away a bit of the mintiness. You could even use a yellow green as well, but I think I might let it kind of be a little bit minty green this time. I think this is actually kind of pretty. I might even let this dry further and I'll carry on and come back to it at the end. Now this little poinsettia, I'm going to go ahead and do the lightest little petals first. And I'm going to be really careful, just try and get the lightest sections, work my way to the dark sections, and just keep adding water. Actually, this might be a good one to use the water brush. Let's do this. You'll see how the water brush works. So I'm just going to use this, and the water is just going to kind of constantly pour out, just ever so slowly, but water is going to come out as I'm working with the brush. So I can just wet things, and then when I want to get some of the red off, I can just dab it into my paper towel, but I might not even need to. This looks like it's actually not acting too wet. I'm not sure. I might come back to this firmer brush. I think the Simply Simon's brush is, I'm happier with the way it's working. So I'm just going to come back. I'm not sure if it was just, I felt more in control of the water with this brush for some reason, or it was, I don't know, I'm happier with the effects. It's blending a bit better. It could be the stiffness of the brush. And I'm also kind of moving in the direction, the way the veins are, just so that I don't lose them. And I might even take a risk. Well, do we do those back ones? Let's try and skip around a little bit like we were doing with the pine cone, so we don't do the branch or the little leaves too close together and have them mush together. So I'm just going to let that dry a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do the green, and then I will come back and do those larger ones in a few minutes. This might be an opportunity to throw some of that dark green into these green leaves. So it's up to you. If you like this bright Christmas green, leave it be. I'm thinking I'm going to drop in a little bit of a dark green in here. Just a tiny bit. Scrape it off my pencil. Woo, that was a lot. That was not a tiny bit, but I actually kind of like that, I think. We'll see. Give it a minute and see if I definitely kind of like that. I think I will. I'm just going to guide it a little bit so it's not just a puddle, because things were drying a little bit so they're not bleeding around quite as much as I'd like them to. So just wet things just that smidgen bit and let it kind of move around. I think I like the dark green. What do you guys think? I'm gonna just dab a little bit on the center. It's probably dry enough I can do these other little petals because I'm not needing it as dry as the Pinecone. I'm not as concerned that it's gonna mush together as that one. Pinecone just felt like there were so many little parts to it. And as usual, if you feel like you're dragging too much pigment around, wash your brush and dry it. And this is a situation where I might end up having green leak into my red because I'm wetting the reds really close to the green. If you don't want that to happen, make sure the green and the green is fully dry before you touch it. Before you touch the reds that are right beside it. I think that actually worked out okay. Since everything is nice and wet still on those lower leaves, I'm going to drop a bit of purple. Optional. It'll just give it more of the watercolor look. That's all I'm really after, is I just like, it's looking really pencil-y right now, which is, ooh, okay, it's bleeding in there. It's looking very penciled, and that is fine, but I don't know. Might as well get a bit of a water look because we can, right? You can see though, when I did that, it is bleeding a little bit, but I don't think I've lost too much. So I'm just going to leave that be now. I am happy that's bled out a little bit. The red has a little bit into the green. I like that look. So here I go, putting a little bit more red in my leaves. That's just a personal thing. Need to make sure I'm wet enough to do this. Okay. All right, so for the berries, I'm going to do them the same way I did those other light berries. Just come into the white sections first with just my water. Drop that water on, kind of come into the darks. I'm going to keep dabbing my brush off because I don't want to overdo. I want that little blueberry to be very light. And then I will go ahead and wet these other little shapes, but I don't want to get in too wet right beside the berries because I don't want to lose my berries because this is such a dark green. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just kind of jumping my brush around, like kind of almost bouncing it, and just doing these little tiny little bits of foliage. So just stay away from the blueberries or the little white berries until you feel like they're kind of mostly dry. And that way you won't get the green just kind of go poof and bleed into them. Unless you want that effect, but because they're such a soft little berry, I think in this case we don't want to have the colors mingling. If anything, to create harmony, I could grab the blue and just drop some of that into my greens. So like rather than let the greens go into my kind of blues, I could just drop a little bit of the blue into the green. And I think that's actually kind of pretty. I do like that. So you could do that every now and then if you want a little bit of a challenge or you want a little variety. But as you can see, this is super cute and beautiful even without the extra blue added. So do what you would like. Ooh, I'm very wet right now, and so things are almost like a little bit too blurry, which is okay if you like that look, but just know a lot of water can sometimes create almost a puddly look. And then if you're too dry, it's tempting to overwork and you can end up mushing it as well. So you just kind of have to kind of play around with it until you feel like you've got the right amount of water in your brush. Ooh, okay, that's called the wrong amount of paint. That's okay, just blend it around a little bit. It's gonna look a little bit washed out. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead now and do the holly, and I'm gonna do the berries the same way. Lightest sections first, move into the darks. And then I will move into the lightest sections of my holly. So I'm just gonna come in here and do the main veins and then kind of work into my lighter areas. And then I'm going to work into my darks. Basically that way I don't lose the lights, right? It's a little more awkward on the holly because they are a different shape, but you can kind of see how that's working. I'm maintaining those lighter colors by having done them first and then coming in after with the darks. I'm definitely losing my texture here, so I may end up coming back in with a little bit of another color to kind of emphasize my veins, but that's okay. I'm going to leave it be for now. We can always, that's the beauty of watercolor pencils. You can come back and throw a few details in if you've lost too many details. So I'm going to let that be. I am, while this is wet, going to add a little bit of the red here to harmonize things. I just think that green is looking so flat, in my opinion. I don't know. Do you guys like it when I add all this extra color in to give this watercolor look, or is that just a bit too challenging, or does it even make it look weird? I kind of like it, but okay. Let's just quickly kind of do these veins. Yeah, I'm definitely losing them. I'm just going to let them be lost. I'm going to try and keep it light in the center, but I'm not going to worry about maintaining things. I will just come in after and get the details. I probably just end up getting the very, very fine veins in the center, maybe a bit darker. But I'll let it be overall, still keeping my center light. Let's just start dropping that red in right away. So I'll just speed things up as I blend these leaves. Once again, I wet my lights, not worrying about maintaining the details, and again, filling things in with my darks, or wetting the darks. Just add water to blend that out. The two holly are kind of mushing together because they're both wet, so I can always push one back after if I want to. I actually don't especially mind the way they look right now. They're not perfect, but they're okay. Once everything's fully dried, you can decide if you've lost some details and you want to come back in and tweak things. So that's what I might do a little bit right here. So I'm just going to go over with my watercolor pencil once again and just kind of fix some of these little pine needles that maybe got a little too blended. Actually, that's a little too bold. I'm going to go over here, I think, and make some of these kind of come in front of it. And then I'm going to tweak this brown a little because I really don't like how red it is. I'm going to just put a little bit of my indigo. That's going to help kind of push that away from being so brown, as well as the dark brown. I'm just not sure if the dark brown is enough on its own. It might be, but anyways, I'm just going to push my browns a smidgen more. So it's not quite as red. And you can decide at that point, do you want to wet it or just leave it be? You could definitely leave it at that stage, just looking like that. Or you could grab your brush and just kind of gently blend it in. Don't use too much water. I think for the most part, I'm okay with those berries. And my pine cone, I'm actually fairly happy with it. If you're not happy with your pine cone, you could easily just come in and push some of your darks. And at this stage, you wouldn't even have to wet them after, right? If you just feel like some of your darks are just not quite dark enough, or a few of these little pine cone pieces kind of mush together and you can't see them apart or tell they're apart, that's where you can just kind of add a little more dark. Makes it a little bit more like a colored pencil piece in some ways if you don't wet it again. But you know what? For something like this pine cone that was such a challenge, especially since I did so many little pieces on this one, I don't think there's any reason why you have to definitely add water to that. I think it looks pretty good to just enhance the little shapes with just your pencil, but you're welcome to add the water too. Now with this one, I actually don't mind it too much. You know what I might even do to make just a little touch of something to it? I might just throw a little bit of brown in, almost to kind of give the impression of a branch that's got a bit of brown. I'm just kind of skipping around so it doesn't look like it's solid, right? I didn't do a straight line. I'm just kind of doing these little tiny scribbles with brown, and it just throws just a hint of something else to it. It's not quite so greeny blue looking. Now, again, you can choose. Do you want to wet it, or do you want to just leave it, kind of let it be the way it is? I might grab this. You know, I never ended up using this, so I'm just going to use this and just add a little bit of water to my browns. Hopefully I don't overwork this, and just add a little bit of wetness to this. All right, now let's move on. And this is the one where we lost our details. So this is the one I definitely want to add a little something to those veins, and I might just go ahead and use my darker green for that. Even though I was hoping to get them a little lighter, I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm Just going to do it like this and let that lighter green kind of add a little bit of whatever, that little bit of variation in our color. And once again, I might even throw a little bit of brown into the branch just to kind of dull things down a little bit, extend the branch a little bit to the side so that that brown shows up. I might deepen the shadows a bit on my berries, not necessary, but I might just try it. I'm going to put more red and then some of my purple color here, and that's going to hopefully push them just a little bit more into the shadow, help give them that slightly three-dimensional look. Then I'll just go ahead and quickly wet them, but wetting, again, like I say, totally optional. If you're happy with the way it looks dry, just leave it dry. I'm kind of thinking maybe that's the best option with some of these because we're just making very minor tweaks. And that brings us to the end of our 7 Christmas botanicals. If you enjoyed this video, stay tuned because I have some more videos coming. You'll want to subscribe so that you get notified when these new Christmas watercolor pencil videos come out. And be sure to check out my watercolor pencil playlist for more fun videos like this. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that it enhances your Christmas celebration, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!